Howdy, y'all. This is Kyle Whittington, and I am joined today by Jasmynne Acevedo. Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to be talking about her story coming out of atheism into Christianity. Jasmynne's not Catholic, so let's keep that in mind whenever you're asking questions and whatnot. But it's still like I'm always fascinated with these stories, especially in like a non-Catholic context, because I think that we can all gain like valuable insight from that and how to engage those who are non-believers. So Jasmynne, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I guess a little bit like just kind of like set the stage for us a little bit. Like where are you from? How'd you grow up and some of the background info?
So I am Puerto Rican, and that plays a big part of my story because culturally, Puerto Ricans tend to be very religious. And so I've always grown up knowing about Jesus, knowing about the resurrection and just the biblical narrative for the most part. I didn't have a very deep understanding, but I got the gist. And essentially, I like my grandfather was a Pentecostal pastor
Okay.
for a long time in like I want to say now my mom's going to be like nope you're wrong, but I think it was like the 70s and 80s,
Okay.
maybe even longer. And I was born in 91, so I like hit the tail end of his ministry. But my whole life we went to a Pentecostal Spanish church.
Okay.
And so that's kind of like my background with it.
Okay. Cool. So did you grow up in Puerto Rico or did you like here in the continental US?
So yeah, continental US. I
Okay.
was born in Pennsylvania, but I grew up in Florida.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. So that makes sense. So now, okay, you said that you grew up Pentecostal, but it was kind of always in a background of your, background of your life. Was that just something that like, church was just something you did on Sundays, or was that something that kind of like permeated through the whole family life?
Yeah, it was pretty much something we did on Sundays, although it was I guess, like, it's not like my family was, like, super worldly, at least in my household. My grandmother always taught us about God from, like, as early as I can remember, and we would sing little Bible songs in English and Spanish. So it was something that, there was an active effort to make sure that I understood. Like, they tried to disciple me.
Hmm.
But, I guess I just didn't get it.
Yeah. So okay. So you just didn't get it, didn't understand. But I mean, how about whenever you say you don't get it, like about how old would you say you were whenever you just didn't get it?
So in the church that I attended at that time, so like from I'd say maybe 7 years old to
Okay.
about um it was about 12 or 13 where I it just became like a fight with my mom every single Sunday.
Mm,
Like it was like, why are we doing this? I don't want to go. I hate this, and she was like, I don't care. We're going. And finally around 13, I want to say, um I I guess I convinced her to like not force me anymore, and that
mm,
was the last time that I went to church for years. And the kind of background of that is like I've always looked back at that time as there was a little bit of legalism going on. At least
mm,
that's how I understood. When I look back on that time, I just remember like it was frowned upon to like wear makeup. It was,
mm.
worldly to cut your hair, even though most people did anyway. But, it was kind of something that like you weren't
Yeah.
supposed to do. Especially my grandparents kind of instilled that to my parents' generation. So it was always kind of like this like we're doing it, but we're not supposed to. So
Mm.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's like I actually kind of grew up in a Pentecostal church too, growing up. So you're talking about like the no cutting the hair and that men need to cut their hair and the no, yeah, like it was like, oh yeah, no, I remember that because like my grandmother was one of those women that had like the beehive hairdos that like that was like I guess the only way to really wear it and
Yeah.
not have it. Yeah. So yeah, so that was
So
that
you get it.
Yep. Nope. I get it. That sounds all. It's like, yeah. No, all this sounds really familiar.
Yeah, yeah. And I
So,
remember,
oh
oh,
yeah.
sorry.
No, no, no. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I remember a time where I came to church with like back in like the early 2000s, it was super like cool to have the sleeves that were long in church, but they like fanned out. I don't know if you remember that
Oh
trend,
yeah.
but yeah, so I thought it was super cute. But anyways, I had this like slit that went from about here to here. And my mom got called out and she was like, "Hey, make sure that she doesn't wear that. That's not really appropriate." That was it. That was the skin that showed from here to here. That was not okay. So,
Dang.
yeah, so I think that was the catalyst for me to be like, "Mom, don't make me go anymore. I hate this. This is ridiculous." And I think she was upset too. So that was kind of how it ended for that section of my faith.
Mm,
And then I'd say from that time around 13 through my adolescence, through like you and I mentioned before we went live, my time in the military.
mm,
Um, I didn't think about God, didn't consider it. I would call myself Christian, but it was like in name only.
mm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
that's
It's just like
basically.
I'm Christian, but only because I really haven't found a better label yet.
Yeah, I didn't even
Yeah.
think about it.
Yeah. Now, I kind of want to draw something back to, you're talking about the, the having the little sleeve there. I heard somebody once mention that whenever you treat modesty, like, have you seen those pictures of like a cow with all the different cuts of meat on it and stuff like that? It's just
Hmm.
like whenever you treat people like that, I'm like, okay, well, this zone is good, this zone is bad, like whatever like that. And it's just like it's not like you mentioned, it's legalism. It's not guided by virtue. And yeah, so but yeah, okay, so you joined the military. I actually do kind of want to like expand on that time in the military a little bit. So how did you find your way there?
So I actually went to college right out of high school. I graduated when I was 17 because that's just kind of how the dates lined up.
Mm,
But and so I did like a 2-year stint in college and I thought I was going to be a personal trainer and I had a degree in sports medicine and I wanted to be like this entrepreneur and start like a studio or whatever. And very quickly I found out that like, hey, I got to pay bills and this ain't it. And I want to move out of my parents' house. So it's time to do something for real. And I ended up at the recruiting office and joined. I went into it with a bit of a like an arrogance because I was like, "Hey, you guys want me. I don't need to do this, but I want to be a medic and I want to go here." And they were like, "All right, cool, whatever. We'll get you to be a medic. Fine." So I joined as a medic. I wanted to be a flight medic. That was the ultimate goal. And it didn't
mm,
quite work out. After 2 years, I got out, but it was a really great time as far as like meeting people and experiencing like
mm,
military. It's crazy. It's
yeah.
unforgettable.
Now, is that where you met your husband?
I did. Yep, I did.
Okay. Is that a story that's appropriate to tell on the air?
I'd rather not.
Fair enough. So, okay, so you went to the military and you come out a little bit. So you mentioned that you were an atheist. Now, is that something that like you started calling yourself an atheist, or is that just like looking back on it, you realized that you were an atheist?
So the atheism actually happened after I got out.
Okay.
I was just learning more about like deeper things, I guess. And I ended up on YouTube, and this was, I guess this was around 2013 or so. So YouTube, like, it was around, but it was starting to get more and more popular. Like, more people were joining instead of just like, I guess the internet nerds. I don't know, but
Mhm.
which I'm totally an internet nerd, so I'm not judging anyone. But
Yeah.
anyways, I ended up on YouTube, and I remember falling into like I like to watch like SciShow and John Green and Hank Green and those characters. And then I found myself watching like these kind of like skeptical atheism videos that were very mocking in nature.
Mhm.
And I remember another clip that I came across was like Ricky Gervais, a
Oh,
comedy
yeah.
skit. that he did about Noah's Ark, and that just hit me at a time where I was like, why do I believe this? Like, this is kind of ridiculous. Um, but it was because I had, looking back, I had kind of more of a childlike understanding of the Bible and
Mhm.
not really like, I wasn't really ready for the intellectual arguments against the Bible and against Christianity. And I fell like hook, line, and sinker. I was like, oh, wow. Not only am I not Christian, but I'm not agnostic either. I'm like an atheist straight up.
Mm. Okay. So you found your way down these okay, you mentioned Ricky Gervais. Were there any other YouTubers, like any others that are like active in this state,
I
like
don't know
to this
if
day?
I don't think they're still active, but I haven't really checked. I can't even tell you what the names of them were.
Okay.
They were like cartoons kind of. Like
Okay.
somebody created them, like just a small YouTube channel, I guess, but probably had a pretty significant following, but pretty low production looking.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's kind of crazy, but like I one of the ones that stick out in my mind a lot is the one where he was kind of making fun of the story of Lot and his daughters,
Mm.
and Sodom and Gomorrah and the Pillar of Salt, and I was just like pairing that with the Ricky Gervais skit making fun of Noah's Ark and how kind of crazy it is to believe that. Um, at that point in time, I was like, "Oh yeah, this is crazy." Like, wow, the Bible's super like insane. Why do we
Mm.
believe this? This is craziness. And at that time I became just as scoffing and mocking as the people I was watching online.
Yep.
And I was just I couldn't believe it. I was like and I hope this doesn't offend anyone, but this is the truth of how I felt. I would be really sweet to your face, but if I knew you were a Christian, I was like, idiot, you know? Like, how can you believe this? But now I played myself because I was the idiot.
Nice. Okay, so you've kind of become an atheist at this point, and I think I read somewhere that you were for some reason I'm thinking that you were an atheist for years. Is that accurate?
Yep, yep, I
So
was.
so what was going on during that time then?
So that time got a little dark. I was living the way I wanted to live. It's not that I was, being like crazy and mean or anything like that, but I just I didn't hold myself to that godly standard anymore. So the truth of the matter is I ended up kind of using some substances, and I won't be specific, but it turned into what I thought was benign because when I grew up, I understood some things to be not good for your soul, and
Mhm.
therefore you don't do that. But because I didn't believe in a soul, because the worldview, and I didn't even have the language for this at the time,
Right.
but the worldview of atheism is materialism. You're just you're just cells, essentially.
Mhm.
You're a meat bag, whatever. I know that sounds crude,
Yeah.
but at the time I didn't see it like that, and I'm like, well, God isn't real, so I'm gonna do whatever I want. And so I ended up, experimenting with things and thinking that it was no consequences, like whatever. I'll do what I want, live how I want. And looking back, I guess you could say that when I look back at that time and I'm like, wow, there were times where I would spend money that I didn't really have so that I could get high and be
Mhm.
high all day long. And I'd wake up in the middle of the night and want to be high again and then go to work really early in the morning. And
Mm.
everyone viewed me as a respectable, punctual, she's ex-military, she's got her stuff together, she's so sweet and nice and professional and blah blah blah, but at home, I was high all the time and I didn't care about anyone but myself, like
Mm.
that was the truth of the matter. And so I lived that way for a few years and then I kind of dropped it cuz I knew that life wasn't right, and I was like, I'm going to let myself go through the withdrawal process, because this is not okay. And I knew that. I look back at that now as the Holy Spirit never really leaving me alone,
Yeah.
and still loving me during that time. But for a while there, I gave it, all the credit to myself, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I dropped that, and I kind of stayed on that for a while, just I'm an atheist, blah, 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 but I'm not doing drugs anymore. So that's good. And then the world kind of went crazy.
Mm.
And politics happened. 2015, certain Donald Trump was campaigning, and I don't care about politics so much now, but at the time I was I was neutral. I was like, I don't know anything about politics
Yeah.
at all. Like, I just, whatever, who cares?
Mm-hmm.
Um but the culture at the time kind of forced everybody to pay attention, and so I did. And so I just realized that this political neutrality that I had actually deviated left. And I started realizing that some of the things that I was being told in the culture, for example, the pro-life, pro-choice debate, I was like, I don't know, I guess I'm pro-life because women, right? Women are great. But never really thought that deep on things. So
Mm-hmm.
it was kind of this political awakening that happened first. And I found people like Ben Shapiro, and it just kind of forced me to like, hey, maybe what you think you don't really know. And so I became a staunch conservative.
Hmm.
And I still consider myself very staunch conservative at this point. Um, and where was I going with that train of thought? I'm sorry. So I became conservative, and I questioned, well, if they're lying to me about these things, could they also be lying about God? And that was the
Hmm.
first kind of thought that was like, well, maybe this atheism thing is not really as sure as I thought it was. So that was like the first little mini seed, I think you can say. But it was actually Jordan Peterson that brought me full circle. I
Oh
guess.
boy.
Yeah, yeah. So I found his lectures and just deep dived, watched hours and hours and hours and hours. And it wasn't until I saw episode 1 of his biblical series, The Psychological Significance of the Biblical Stories, part 1, and it blew my mind. It was the first time that I realized the Bible was actually like super deep, super wise, rich, amazing. It was insane.
Nice. Okay. I guess it was that kind of like you mentioned earlier how you had, I guess, that really low view of scripture. So whenever when Ricky Gervais is questioning Noah's Ark in Genesis, she's like, of course this is ridiculous. However, I believe like that Jordan Peterson series was specifically on Genesis. I haven't actually seen it. It was on Genesis, right?
It was on it goes a little bit past Genesis, I
Okay.
think. Wait, actually, does it? Hold on. There's like, gosh, I want to say there's like at least 8, maybe more. I don't know what it expands to. Yeah, I think it is just Genesis.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, but yeah.
Yeah. So okay. So what were some things in that just kind of like stood out to you that thought like, oh goodness, this is way deeper than I thought it was.
Well, and I can't remember like the exact things because this was back in about 2016, but
Hmm. You've slept since then.
yeah. So, um essentially just the intellectual like knowledge of it, it
Hmm.
just the ideas that he was presenting were a wake-up call, because it was like before it was like, oh well, God created the earth in 6 days, and it was like, actually no, there's a really deep truth to this, that this so-called science that you praise can't really articulate fully.
Mm.
And it is a collection of wisdom and how we came from, I don't know how to even describe it. Of course, I'm no Jordan Peterson, but
No, you're
essentially
fine.
the emergence of consciousness
Mhm.
and how that's documented in scripture in this Genesis story. And then he goes on to talk about Cain and Abel and the significance of bitterness and how important forgiveness is. It was all blowing my mind. Like, oh, wait. So it's not just about like Noah's Arky. This
Mhm.
is way deeper than that. And even the Noah's Ark story blew my mind when he talked about it, because up until that point, it was like all the animals two by two. Okay.
Right.
But in reality, it was the world and our sin nature is so dark and so wicked that he had to start over again. And there was only one man and one family that was righteous enough to save. That's the real significance of the story. And I was just like, what? That's insane.
Yeah.
Why didn't I know that?
Yeah. So, okay, so you've gotten the Jordan Peterson treatment, I guess. And so I guess like you realize that there's a deeper understanding. Was it just like a light bulb moment, or was it more like a process?
Well, both. That was like a light bulb moment into realizing that, like, I got this atheism thing wrong. And like my understanding of Christianity was from a place of arrogance. And so, but it took a while, because at this point there was a lot of spiritual blindness. And you kind of walk in this doubt for so long where it's like, but we're talking about God, like the concept of God. How though? How? Like from an atheist perspective, it was like up until that point, it was all spaghetti monster in the sky or whatever, flying
Right.
spaghetti monster. That is what I thought. I was like on that level of, I guess, skepticism. Like, so it took a while. It definitely took a while. But something kind of significant happened. And it kind of broke those spiritual chains, and that was motherhood. There was
Mhm.
actually a couple of things, but when I had my first child, it really, and I had my first kid in 2020. So of course, 2020 was a crazy time and political division and strife. And by this time, I realized how corrupt everything is, how corrupt the government is, how
Mhm.
corrupt just media and everything. And I realized that I don't want my child to be misled into this atheism, into this nihilism, materialism that we're seeing permeated in the culture. I don't want that for him. And another thing that happened with motherhood was, being a parent, it changes you. It shows you what the love of our heavenly Father is for us,
Mhm.
because up until that point, like, I love my husband, I love my family, but there is no love like the love of a mother to a child. Like there's nothing that can possibly compare other than a father to his child.
Mhm.
Like, the parent child relationship is powerful.
Yeah.
And I was like, I want to raise him in a Christian home. And at this point, I guess you could say I was like agnostic, because,
Mm.
I didn't like necessarily say I'm agnostic now, but I think it naturally developed like that. But I knew that I wanted to give him a moral understanding that came from something more. And so that was kind of the first thing.
Mm.
And then so I we ended up moving to Alabama, and I got invited to the church that I attend now.
Mhm.
And, I listened to the sermon the very first time, worshiped with them, and I was just like blown away, because I guess I came into it with a different heart. This
Mhm.
time I wanted to believe. I didn't want to just like, experience church for, my kid, but not really,
Mm.
like I still, I was like, I genuinely want to know if you're real, God. Like, show me, help me believe. And so, that prayer call at the end, to give your life to Christ, I prayed genuinely.
Mhm.
Um, so those were the two kind of big changes there.
Yeah. So you mentioned that somebody invited you to that church. Who was that? Like, how did that invite come about?
So it was actually my aunt.
Oh,
Yeah. Um, yeah, she was just like, "Hey, I don't know if you're interested, but, Sunday, why don't you come along?" So I was like,
nice.
"Absolutely."
Nice. Okay, so was she going to that church or was that just like a okay,
Yep.
cool. Okay, yeah, because it's just like you showed up to this new area and okay, cool. So that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Now, all right, and you've been going to that church basically ever since. So if I'm putting that on the timeline, it'd be like 2020, 2021-ish.
Yeah, 2020.
Okay, sweet. Okay, well, cool. Well, that sounds awesome. Now, and this obviously you can feel free to decline the answer to this question. Where was your husband at in all of this?
So I don't want to get into too many
Okay.
specifics, but he was there for me the whole time, kind of like we would have these like deep, deep, deep discussions. And I think he kind of, I don't know, from things in his life, he strayed away from the faith of his upbringing a little bit too, and that
Mm,
was Catholicism.
mhm,
Um, but I think he's viewing things differently now, and just the events of my life um are kind of, softening his heart a little bit, I think.
mhm.
So yeah, but he was there the whole time, just living life with me, trying to do the best he can to provide.
Well, that's really cool though, because I mean that at the same time, like, all love comes from God. So like as long as the love is there, then God is there. So that's really cool. Now, you mentioned something about the love of the mother for her child. Are you familiar with the show Bluey?
Yes, I am.
That sleepy time episode is what I had in my mind whenever you were saying that. It's just like that scene that like puts me in tears every single times whenever it was just like the mother's like burning love and like just warmth and just oh man. So yeah, a recommendation for you all. If you have not watched Bluey, you're wrong. And go fix that immediately. But okay, well, cool. So let's talk about a little bit what you've got going on your channel here because I watched you do this video on oh, what's his face? That creepy dude, Jeffrey Marsh. Um, yeah. So like, so what do you got going on like the bold reflections?
Okay, so I've got to say one more thing about my story
Oh
before
no,
we
no, keep
get
going.
there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because that channel came from what happens next. And that is when I was pregnant with my second child, um, I got sick with COVID,
Mm,
and I was about 7 months pregnant at this time. And so I went into the local hospital. I was sick for about like, I think over a week, and I wasn't getting better. It was
mm,
like really, really hard to breathe. So they flew me to Birmingham, the big, huge hospital in Birmingham.
mm.
Um, and I remember getting to the ICU, and I remember them giving me spaghetti. I always say this in my story because it was just such a core memory, but the spaghetti was bland and it was kind of cold. And the next memory that I had was waking up and the nurse asking me how I felt. And I was like, I'm fine, I'm good. Did not realize that I had been on a ventilator for 10 days. So I almost, yeah, kicked the bucket and it got pretty serious. Um, so when that dawned on me and the nurse informed me of that, like I had to like check my fingernails to like confirm that she wasn't insane. And like they genuinely looked a lot longer. So this was, I was like, oh my God. And that like insanely blew my mind, like changed my life forever. And as soon as she left the room, I prayed with the most sincere heart that I could ever have. And I was like, God, I will never, ever doubt you again. Thank you so much for my life, and I don't know why I'm alive, and I don't know why my son made it and I made it, but whatever it is, I give it to you completely. Um, and so that was kind of like that last spiritual chain that I said, even though I had the
Wow.
intellectual understanding that Christianity was amazing, and even though I prayed that prayer, I still struggled with doubt until that moment. And the significance of it really, the nurse, she was like, you're really lucky to be alive, and you're really lucky that your baby's alive, because there's other people on this ward, the maternity ICU ward, that did not make it. Either the mothers didn't make it or the children didn't make it. And just like that'll do something to you.
Yeah, wow. Well, praise God for that. That is my goodness. So I couldn't imagine being on ugh,
Yeah.
man, I've got this problem where somebody will tell me something on the show and blow my mind, and I'll just be like at a loss for words, and that just comes across as dead air, and I'm not really sure. Wow.
No worries, man. It was definitely an event, and I spent another month in the hospital after that, roughly I think it was like 3 weeks.
Wow.
But it was just a zest for life, even being confined in a hospital, and at that time I couldn't have visitors and all that because of
Oh,
COVID. But yeah, it was really hard to be without my at the time he was 1. Just missing that, it was really hard. And there was, I mean, my husband would tell me that when I first was in the, on the ventilator, my son would, because like I said, I spent, a week or so in bed, like
mhm.
just dying. Now I know I was actually dying, but um crying for me. And I couldn't be with him because I was like, I'm scared to get him sick, So it was a really trying time, but I don't know if anyone watching can relate to surviving something like that, where you're on your second life now, like
Yeah.
you're just like, I love being alive, and I'm so grateful for every day. Even on the hard days, I'm just like, I'm so happy that I'm alive, and I get to
Wow.
experience life with my family, and I love it. I love being alive. It's great.
Yeah. No, like,
So,
wow. That's that's amazing. Like, thank God for that. Like, that is man. Yeah, I guess I do have one thought, and that's, like Jesus Christ says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. And it's just like all life does come from God. And that's one of those things of how you were given the opportunity to see that and experience that in a more visceral way than most people ever will. And I see, Marcella's in here in the chat saying that, like, you'll be able to reach more people because of you, or because of what happened. And I think that's definitely true, because it's just, wow, the just the amazingness of life, and how, like, you not only intellectually understand it, but you also experience it, like, at the heart level as well. And I think, like, man, to borrow a phrase from Father Mike Schmitz, what a gift. So
amen.
yeah.
Amen. It is such a gift, and it's one of those, it can be hard to express this to somebody who's suffering in some way, but we don't know what God knows.
Mm,
So I just feel like, even in when I was on the ventilator, right? For
mm,
example, and me and my son's life were hanging in the balance. I think it could be hard for people who loved me at that time to see that there was a bigger purpose here. But how do you, like, how do you put that into words? Because I got to experience it for myself, and that's one of the things that you asked about the channel, and I definitely want to get to that, absolutely. But essentially, it was that wanting other people to have that life too, even how do I say this? Even in this dark world, and though we can't experience the fullness of what Christ has given to us through his sacrifice, we can still have joy. And that's what I want people to have. I want people to understand the Bible like I am coming to understand the Bible. It's
Mm,
not just fairy tales. This is like the nature of reality. And I don't know. So in the hospital, um, I just it was a moment of pure, unfiltered gratitude
mm,
to be alive. And just, gosh, I can't even, I don't even know if I can ever replicate that feeling again. But I ended up going, I'd say about maybe about 6 months later, roughly. So that happened August 2021, the whole hospital stint, and then February 2022. So however long that was.
oh goodness.
So I ended up going through, it's called Freedom at my church. It's a 13-week curriculum where we got together, just a couple women, and we would go through the curriculum. And at the
Mm,
end, there was a conference at the church where it was worship, like it was like a 2-day conference.
mm,
Worship, prayer, like deep, deep prayer, and a lot of reflection. And it changed my life. I can't recommend it enough. If anybody has the opportunity to ever go to Freedom, it's amazing. But one of the prayers I remember was, God, help me be bold, unapologetic for Christ. I don't care what anyone says. I don't care if they mock me the way I used to mock other people who believed in Christianity. I don't care, because
mm,
this is real. And I just developed a heart for people. So now I want to witness to them. I want to evangelize because I love them.
mm.
Um, and so that's kind of sort of where Bold Reflections got its start, was from that prayer. And it
Ah,
took a while, but it ended up being later that year that I launched the channel. And after a 3-month hiatus, right after launch, I got serious and I started being consistent. And it's been about 2.5 months since my, like, I'm doing this for real, for real.
nice.
And that's today. Here we are.
Okay, well, cool. Yeah, that's really cool. So what do you first off, let me apologize for like trying to skip right into that part without like if there's a climax of the interview, that was it. And like and here I feel like a heel trying to skip over that. So thank you for like it's like no, we're gonna rewind it back a little bit. So that's awesome.
No
So
problem.
yeah, so then the okay, so what are you doing on there? Like I mentioned, like I saw your video about like Jeffrey Marsh and whatnot. What's I guess what's the mission there?
So the mission essentially is to kind of observe the culture, um, thoughtfully through a through a Christ focused perspective. So though I'm not like a theological, Bible scholar, and I don't know the ins and outs of every denomination there is, um, in the themes of the culture that we're seeing. So some of the biggest battlefronts, the most divisive issues: abortion,
Mm,
transgenderism, homosexuality, all these things, right? Just Christianity in general is being, you know, I don't want to use the word persecuted, but there's a lot of hostility.
mhm,
And I think it's because, a lot of Christians are afraid to offend. So we've let it get so far. And I just, I kind of want to be one of those people that woke me up on YouTube.
mm,
Um, and just have, I sometimes I'm like, should I talk about politics? Should I, like, is that too divisive? Is that appropriate for a Christian channel? And of course it is. Of course it is. Because you know, we are called to follow Christ in all aspects of our life, and to just skip over, like, well, don't talk about music, or don't talk about what this other church is doing even though it's heretical, stuff like that. So I'm just, that's kind of the focus there. And I really do feel passionately about the transgender topic, and this is why I did that video on Jeffrey Marsh, is because it it's just evil. It's really evil.
yeah.
and I get fired up about it because I'm like, is everybody like seeing this? Are we seeing this right now?
Y'all are okay with this.
Right. What are
Yeah.
we doing here?
Yeah. Now, okay, so that's really cool. So, all right, well, cool. So, I guess what do you have coming up next? I mean, like, so what happens next in this?
Next, I'm just focusing on growing as I try to manage my household. um, and essentially, I guess, I did my first interview last week. I think it was a huge success. Another testimony. It was awesome.
Mhm,
And so I kind of like that. And I think I'm going to try and do more of that and just keep on being consistent. That's the big
mhm.
part. But of course, with the new setup that I told you about before going live,
Yeah.
definitely it's starting to feel like a real endeavor here.
Yeah, no, like, if y'all could see my, like, duct tape together setup now, like, I'm seeing, like, the lighting you've got going on back there, and it's just like, "Man, I want some of that." It's just, like, the piece of advice that was given for me, and this'll lead into the next topic, but, like, the piece of advice that was given to me was, bad sound is unforgivable, or like, bad video is forgivable, bad sound is not. So if you're gonna get one really good thing, just get one good mic and just figure out the rest later. Meanwhile, it looks like you've got both a fantastic mic, a fantastic camera, and like great setup. But so with all of that being said, what's it like? I know, like, from personal experience, it's kind of hard getting started as a new creator. Like, I know you're still just getting started, kind of new, but what would be some advice that you would give to somebody who's like thinking about starting a channel of their own?
I'd say, and I need to learn this advice too. Don't focus too much on the numbers. Just focus on improving every single time, being authentic, and being just unafraid. Don't be
Mhm.
afraid of your faith. If you feel like you have something to say, just say it. Like, who
Yeah.
cares? What's the worst that is gonna happen? You're gonna get a bad comment, or like I said in the Jeffrey Marsh video, that was kind of the first channel that blew up, went viral for me.
Mhm.
I think it's like only like 6,000 views, which
Yeah.
is huge for me, but in the grand YouTube world, it's not much. But still, who
Oh,
cares?
oh, listen. I think that video has gotten more views than my number one video. So, like,
No kidding.
yeah, so, like, don't worry. Like, to me, like, if one of my videos got 6.6 thousand views, not that I looked it up before the interview, would that was uh I would be ecstatic if one of mine hit that. So, like, don't downplay that, because that's, I mean, yeah.
Well, I really appreciate that, and I'm telling you, like, it is such an emotional roller coaster, like, when I get a video that does well like that, and then I work hard on the next one, and it's, like, 20 views, and I'm like, "Oh,
Nothing.
dang."
Yeah.
Oh, man. I spent hours on that one, but anyway, it's fine, and that's what I'm saying to any people who are interested in creating. Do not focus on the numbers because really you have an audience of one, and that's God.
Mhm.
God is the only one that matters, and we could only be so lucky that people, hear our message and that it's a godly message. Um,
Yeah.
and I'd also say that video, honestly, I was so nervous to put it on there
Mhm.
because what I talked about in that video was, um, some of the people watching might be familiar with the mother, not necessarily the creator, the mother that kind of called out Jeffrey Marsh,
Mhm.
who, if you guys don't know, Jeffrey Marsh is a non-binary activist on TikTok with a significant following. And he kind of addresses children in his messages and talks about going no contact with your parents and kind of pushing this agenda, this pride agenda, despite its destructive nature. And so this woman called him out. Yep, that's right, saying creepy weirdo. um, but essentially, she was harassed and threatened, and
Mhm.
they, said, "We know where your kids go to school. We know what time they get off." And she apologized, and was like, I'll take the videos down, just please leave me alone. And so to say that I wasn't nervous to address that situation and call this Jeffrey Marsh guy out and stand in solidarity with that mom, I'd be lying to say it was easy. Like, it
Yeah.
wasn't. It was not easy. And I was like, I had to pray about it. And I'm like, Lord, um is this foolish? Should I do this? And I'm like, yeah,
Hmm.
you said bold, I'll be bold, here we go. And one of the verses that came to my heart was Psalm 91 verse 7, which I don't have it memorized, but essentially, it's about trusting God through fear. And just, I think it's like 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, something like that. Do you know which verse I'm talking
Hold
about?
on. What's the what is it again?
Psalm 91, verse 7.
So Psalm 91 verse 7. Okay, we're just gonna Google it. All right. Though 1,000 fall at your side, though 10,000 are dying around you, these evils will not touch you.
Yeah. Um, so that was the verse that came to my heart. Doesn't matter how many people will try to harass you if they try like they did for this woman. And it could happen right after you put the video up. It could happen in 15 years. But there are people that want to hurt people with a Christian worldview because they have a wickedness that they're struggling with.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is exactly what this verse is talking about.
Hmm.
Like, the one who is in me is greater than anyone in this world. So what am
Yeah.
I afraid of again?
Yeah. Well, like so I've got a couple thoughts on that where it's just like people come after you. Like, well, first thought is that the church thrives under persecution. Like the church like is fueled by the blood of martyrs. And so like that's why like you look at Christianity in general on the global scale, like here in the West, it's kind of, it's kind of petering out. But meanwhile, in Africa, where they are having to like literally like to be a Christian is a death sentence in some places.
Oh yeah.
And that is the place where Christianity is exploding right now. Like it just the numbers are just like it's so interesting because I was looking at Anglican numbers. Anglican in England. So like England is basically a pagan nation again. Like they are completely, yeah, like they are a Christian minority nation now. However, Anglican numbers in Africa, that is where like all of their growth has come from. So like Anglicanism like as a whole has grown, but it's 100% only because of Africa. So
Wow.
so whenever I hear like they're coming after you, like it's like, well, a little bit like if these kind of people are coming after you, you're doing something right.
Yeah, and it's I think that we in America, we've been very, very fortunate. We just have grown up in a society that's safe. Safe, not, maybe not for like individuals who grow up in, like, poor areas and crime ridden areas, and I get that. But generally, like, we don't have a lot of economic instability. We haven't
Mhm.
had it in a long time. So we think that, um like, it's kind of, in the Bible it talks about the rich having a harder time to get to heaven because you feel
Mhm.
like you don't need them, or you don't need
Right.
God. And so, where there, it's like that is their only hope. And
Mhm.
it's really ours too. We just are so blind, and we're so Sodom and Gomorrah 2.0,
Mhm.
but probably worse. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Like, so I believe I was reading it in by a book by St. Alphonsus Liguori called Uniformity with God's Will. And he was talking about encountering a beggar who just was so incredibly joyous and everything. And he's just like, who are you? Why are you so happy? Like you're poor, you have nothing. And he's like, because I have Christ within me. And I have my king with me. He is on my side, and nothing, no earthly suffering will ever take that away. And it's just like I think that's really profound to know that like whenever you have nothing left except but to lean on Christ, that's where like that's like the easy way to holiness. Like and or I don't know if easy is the right word for it, but does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, I get you. I
yeah,
get you.
yeah. But yeah, that's yeah. And then the other thought that I had was the story. So I went to a university in Steubenville, Ohio, called Franciscan University, and he wasn't the founder of the school, but he kind of revitalized it. So at one time, like back in the 70s or whatever, Franciscan was like a known party school, and like it had even like ended up on like Playboy's like best party schools in the country, whatever. It was pretty disgusting stuff. And while we then they got this new president in, Father Mike Scanlon, and he was like, okay, we're going to institute community stuff. We're going to do all this stuff, and we're going to keep being faithful to Christ at the absolute center of it, and of it all. And he was doing some things that were pretty radical, and especially for a university, he's like, well, how could a university like be successful while following Christ? And like at one point during a meeting, and I'm probably butchering the exact details of this, and he said, somebody's just like, well, if we do all this, are we going to be successful? And his response was, I don't know, but we will follow Christ. So if it does fail, at least we can say that we did that. And I think like as a creator, that's something that we all need to like keep in mind, is just like, is your channel going to blow up? I mean, in all actuality, the answer to that is probably not. But you might be able to touch one soul. You might be able to reach one person. The Holy Spirit might use you, and like, in cooperation with, or with your efforts cooperating with the will of God, you could participate in helping bring another soul to heaven. And like, and that, I don't know. I don't think you can put a price tag on that. So
Yeah, you really can't. My pastor, in one of his sermons, he said, you don't want to get to heaven and be like, whew, just barely made it. I'm good. You want to be like, come on, everyone. We made it. We're good.
yeah,
Like have a whole crowd. And that would be amazing.
yeah, that's awesome. So, do you have any other big products, or not products, or projects, or anything like that? Anything you'd like to plug?
Well, I've got an interview with It's Your Girl Sang
Ooh,
coming up. So that will be happening on the 18th, I believe.
all right.
Yeah, so look out for that. She's super cool. I love her channel, love what she does. She's got the Christian game room thing going on, and I just love it. It's fun. Um, and just look out for my videos. Just it's a lot of fun. Maybe someday I'll be able to contribute financially with the channel. But for now, it's definitely a passion project. I love it. So just follow me on Bold Reflections YT.
Yeah, okay. Very cool. So anyway, I've got her channel linked down in the description, so y'all check it out, give her a subscribe. And for those of you who stuck around this long, thanks for watching. God bless. And I don't know if this is